Hey, welcome back to the Sub Brief. I hope you're having a great day. Today we're going to talk about the Chinese Coast Guard intercepting a Philippine Coast Guard in the South China Sea and taking some of their supplies that they were delivering to a small outpost about 160 miles off the southern island of Palawan called Second Thomas Shoal. They have a beached old World War II era landing craft there that was designed to bring supplies and tanks on board a beach that they beached years ago, that they've kept a platoon of about 10 Marines roughly on board for many decades. And because there's no fresh water or food source out there, the Philippine Coast Guard routinely, once or twice a month, will bring them weapons, ammunition, food and water, diesel fuel for their generators, and so forth. Well, it is one of these deliveries that was intercepted that you see here in this video by the Chinese Coast Guard, to the point to where they surrounded the boat and attacked it with boat hooks, fire axes, and diving knives, injuring one of the Philippine Coast Guard sailors by cutting off his thumb with a fire axe. Kind of ridiculous and crazy video that's been going out. And they take the bags. So after that event is done, and I've watched both the Chinese version of it on their social media and the Philippine version of it, neither one of those two videos have how this started or even how it ended. It just has this middle portion where this attack takes place and the Coast Guard guy is getting first aid administered to him as the boat is surrounded. And after this is done and he's in the hospital, he gets visited by the Philippine president that you see here, a Mr. Bongbong Marcos, who, after he awards this injured crew member in his hospital bed, he makes a short statement to the media with the doctors and nurses and other military members stating this: the Philippines, quote, "We are not in the business of instigating wars. We will not resort to the use of force or intimidation or deliberately inflict injury or harm to anyone." So that is the Philippine president's response to what happened. But he closes with this statement, and this is really important. He says, "But at the same time, we stand firm. Our calm and peaceful disposition should not be mistaken for acquiescence." And I think that may be a mistranslation, or he is a little bit out of touch with the situation that he may find himself in as a newly elected president of the Philippines here. By being calm and peaceful and not reacting, not necessarily harmfully, but not reacting at all, is like quite literally the definition of acquiescence. So he's kind of saying two conflicting statements in the same sentence here, which is a very, that's why he got elected president, right? But whenever it comes to the reality of the war on the seas that is happening, the conflict that's going on, this type of position, it just puts you at a tactical disadvantage every time you try and do this. And they're maintaining their position on the Second Thomas Shoal. They're going to have to resupply it again here in a couple weeks. Plus this supply that was intercepted, they need to get supplies to them sooner rather than later. So this whole situation is going to repeat itself, I think. And if the Philippines don't change something operationally in how they conduct these resupply missions, we're just going to see more and more escalation from the Chinese Coast Guard. So I want to broaden the perspective here a little bit and compare that statement with what the Chinese Coast Guard law says. The Chinese Coast Guard law that was written in 2021 but was not enforced until about 6 weeks ago, states that the Chinese Coast Guard has the authority to use weapons to expel ships and inspect their supplies, which is what they did in the video here, in any waters that are China maritime jurisdiction. And that's not defined. That jurisdiction, again, in that law is not defined at all. So what we have is a very aggressive Coast Guard against a passive defense entity, Coast Guard. And that works well when you're in a country that has rules of law that protects protest and free speech. As long as you're peaceful, you can have a passive defense, for instance, here in the United States when you protest. As long as you're not chucking fire extinguishers at Capitol Hill police, you will simply be detained for your protest if it gets out of hand and then released. But whenever you're on the high seas and you have one of two parties that are not respecting or abiding by the international law on the sea, then your passive protest will not be effective, because the passive protests depends on the law protecting your protest. The Chinese are clearly writing their own law, quite literally, and then acting on that law, that Chinese Coast Guard law. So that's the real difference here. So it's important that as the United States does our RIMPAC naval exercise that is going on right now, that we do not interfere on behalf of the Philippines as long as they have this position. Now, backing up the Chinese Coast Guard during this event is a Type 075 LHA. That is a large flat deck ship that supports marine landing assaults with helicopters, VTOL aircraft, and a lot of Chinese Marines on board. This is in the vicinity of Second Thomas Shoal as this is happening. So the implication here is that China is in position to rapidly escalate the situation should they choose to. Now, the U.S. is in position to take action. We have a very recent, as of 2014, enhanced defense cooperation agreement with the government of the Philippines, and we can operate our military, and do operate our military, out of 9 locations in the Philippines across the northern and southern islands here. As well as currently we have the USS Theodore Roosevelt Carrier Strike Group very, very close by. But at no point in this agreement of 2014 is there any military obligation for defense. It's quite different, actually. This is an infrastructure agreement where we're going to these airports, marine camps, and naval ports, and we're building and improving the infrastructure there for them. Now, you may not like that as an American taxpayer, but that's beyond the scope of this topic. That's what we've been doing there for 10 years now. This is not new, and you should not be surprised by that. But the people that are stationed there cannot be permanently stationed. We have to have a continuous rotation of troops on these islands as they're doing training for the Philippine military. And then the last obligation of this agreement is disaster relief. Some of the typhoons that come through this area of the world are quite large and devastating. They wreck Guam every year, it seems, and we got to always rebuild that place. And we do similar things, saving lives and rebuilding in the Philippines. And that's really the primary purpose of this agreement is military training, infrastructure repair and upgrade, and then disaster relief from those big storms, not military defense. Now, there is a mutual defense treaty that goes all the way back to 1951 that we signed with them when the Philippines got its independence after World War II. And there's no military action required in this treaty either. Hey, this is Aaron from the future. We here thought that we would put some comments aside immediately by explaining in just about 30 seconds what the Mutual Defense Treaty of 1951 actually states is legally required by both parties. So give me a 30-second timer. I'm going to just quickly run through this very short agreement. The preamble, which is the intent of this treaty, simply states the U.S. and Philippines have faith in the United Nations. Yay, remember that was new back in 1951. We have mutual pride, a sense of unity, and does not change any prior agreements, okay? Now, let's begin with the legal agreements now. Article 1 says the United States and the Philippines will use the United Nations to resolve disputes peacefully between our two countries. Okay, makes sense. Article 2, mutual aid and develop capacity to resist armed attack. So we're going to train their military. That's what we're doing right now at those 9 locations. Article 3, U.S. and Philippines will talk from time to time. Yeah, call your mom. Article 4, if attacked, appropriate action shall be taken immediately to report the armed attack to the United Nations Security Council. So that's where this whole agreement hinges on, is this Article 4. This Mutual Defense Treaty is literally defense in front of the United Nations Assembly and the Security Council. So Article 5 says any armed attack, that is air, land, or sea, will trigger Article 4, go to the UN. Article 6 says this agreement does not conflict with the United Nations goal. Article 7 says this treaty is ratified by the United States and the Republic of the Philippines. We agree on it. Article 8, the last one, says remain in force indefinitely. This agreement will remain in force indefinitely with 1 year's notice of termination by either party, which hasn't happened ever in the lifetime of this some 70-year-old treaty now. And that's it. So as long as the Philippines choose inaction as a defense, I think it's important that the United States stays out of the way and does not insert or intervene with the Philippine defense at this time. And we'll just see where this goes, because there's going to be more resupply trips to the Second Thomas Shoal. Like I said, they happen at least once a month, sometimes more often than that. So this will happen again. And now that there's an LHA in the vicinity, it may escalate, much farther beyond than just a Coast Guard action at this time, because the LHA being part of the PLAN means it doesn't fall under that law. The China can't use the Chinese Coast Guard law to protect actions done by the Type 075. That's completely different. So now, if you're wondering why China is so violent right now, it's because of the Chinese Coast Guard law that I break down their legal use of lethal force in their eyes in this video. I recommend you go watch it. It's only about 15 minutes long, and you'll have a better understanding of how this works in China.